Hello and welcome to New People, New Ways, a podcast in partnership with Fresh Expressions Florida and Fresh Expressions United Methodist that explores new ways of being church through the stories and insights of scholars and practitioners alike. I'm Piper Ramsey-Sumner, a layperson and cultivator of Fresh Expressions for the Florida Conference.
And I'm Michael Adam Beck. I'm the director of Fresh Expressions Florida and Fresh Expressions UM. And today we are joined by Matt Stout. Matt is an elder in the United Methodist Church. Give it up for the UMC friends. Serving Garden City UMC near Savannah, Georgia. He has a wife, 3 kids, and an elderly dachshund. And Matt is a nerd who enjoys fantasy, sci-fi, tabletop games, playing the banjo, and he's turning those things into forms of church for people outside the church. So Matt, thank you so much for joining with us today.
Thanks so much for having me, y'all. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah.
Yes, welcome. Glad you're here. I'm excited to get nerdy with you. We were already, before we started recording, talking about some nerdy game stuff.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah. So the first question at the top, who is Matt Stout?
Well, I was born at a very young age, and I was born in Knoxville, Tennessee. I'm from Augusta, Georgia. Grew up in Augusta. United Methodist pastor, and recently ordained about a year ago. And I've just been living in the Savannah, Chatham County area for a few years now. I just love nerdy stuff. I tell people I'm an avid indoorsman. I love to just like read and watch TV. I'm into sci-fi and fantasy and stuff like that. To the point that like my wife has a moratorium on Lord of the Rings analogies in my sermons. Like I can't use another Lord of the Rings story for another year or so before she has to space them out. And it's getting that way with Star Trek too. I talked about the Kobayashi Maru test in a sermon, and my wife was like, too far. You got to rein it back in, buddy.
Too esoteric.
That point where you have to explain the Kobayashi Maru in order for your sermon to work. You gotta rein it back in. So, but yeah, I just love all that kind of stuff. Really enjoy being down here in South Georgia in Savannah. It's a nice area.
Nice. Do you know any fun, nerdy Methodist facts about Savannah, Georgia?
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of them. We really like to make our jokes about Sophie Turner here. It's really, it's a fun thing. Just being kind of the ground zero for John Wesley's time of shame. It was a lot of fun.
Field ministry experience. Yeah,
that's right.
Wesley's most humbling moments.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
That's great. Well, okay. Because we're going to talk about what you do with Dungeons and Dragons and church, but I want to know, because I feel like there's a lot of people who are pastors and also nerds. Do you think that there's something going on there? Why do you think there are so many people that might follow and be called into ministry that are also interested maybe in these kinds of things, maybe the more bookish types, the more nerdy types?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it makes sense. Being bookish certainly lends toward pastoral ministry. I also think, so I have this theory about myself, and maybe this can kind of get into the games church stuff too, but I am an introvert by nature. And I think a lot of pastors are, which is weird because it's a very social job. But one of the things I like the most about gaming is that it gives me a social outlet where the rules are very much structured. I don't have to come up with something to talk about. I don't have to small talk my way around. We can talk about the game and how it's going and what it works and what the rules are. And there's a very, very much structured way of engaging with other people. And so for me as an introvert, it just feels like I am getting that socialization in a way that doesn't wear me out quite as much as just standing in a room with people and having to figure out what to say does. And so I think that I probably am not alone among pastors who also kind of have that same introversion and that same kind of streak about them. So my theory about it.
Very cool.
It's a good theory.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. So, like we mentioned a little bit. Tell us about Game Church and how did it come to be, and how is it done, and what have you seen kind of as a result of that?
Yeah, we've been doing this less than a year now. It's still relatively new. So, like I said, I moved to Savannah or the Chatham County area 8 or 9 years ago, and started just getting into tabletop gaming. And so I have been kind of a member of the Savannah tabletop gaming community for a while, and have gotten to know friends there. I try to kind of be the chaplain of my local game store. If someone has any kind of spiritual need, I try to make it known. But I'm not trying to get out there and proselytize anybody during that. And recently, my conference has been really putting a big emphasis on fresh expressions, on new ways of doing church. And so they approached me and said, Matt, we know that you're into this tabletop gaming stuff. Is there anything there? Do you think you could make something out of this? And of course, this is something I've been thinking about for years, but I never wanted to bring it up because I would just be like, he's just trying to get paid to play D&D. Like he just wants to like justify gaming on work hours. Right. But, being approached about it is a whole different issue. And so I said, yeah, I think we could do this. And I had a buddy that I played, we played the X-Wing miniatures game, which is a Star Wars miniatures game together. So we played X-Wing and I talked to him about it. And he was like, yeah, man, I have been wanting to get into a small group. He used to be big. He used to go be a big church goer and got really burned. But he said he missed the small group kind of community. And so I kind of pitched him this Game Church idea. And he was like, heck yeah, man. That's something I would be really into. So he was on board early on. I have a friend who's the father of an Episcopal church in the next town over. And I knew he was big into D&D. So we kind of got him as a kind of an ecumenical project with both of us. And we kind of, the three of us kind of put it together of how it was going to go. So we meet every other Thursday. We meet at the local game store, just kind of take up a table. And we start out with a Jesus story. We start out kind of just sharing just a thought, really. And that usually is pretty good. But the biggest part is when we share what's going on in our lives that week. And so, we share prayer requests. We share just what's important to us right now. And that has been the best part, really. And it's great because at first people would kind of listen. It felt like they were putting up with the spiritual aspect of it in order to get to the game. But like a couple sessions ago, I was ready to get to the game. I was like, all right, guys, let's move on to the game time. And then the youngest guy in our group, who's 18 years old, was like, well, what about this? And then I started another round of discussion and another couple rounds. And I was like, man, I was ready to move on. I was ready to close this portion of our time. But he wasn't, and the group wasn't. And they really engaged with the spiritual aspect of it. And so I think that has been my favorite part of it is just getting to know folks better and being intentional about cultivating spiritual relationships where those gaming relationships already existed.
Matt, I just have a thought and maybe a question around this of like just that feeling of in order to be a clergy person, then I can't really do tabletop gaming because it would be assumed, I'm just trying to get paid to do D&D and such. And we've, accepted this kind of sacred secular divide in our culture. And then the professionalization of the clergy says these are the stuff the pastor does, right?
Yeah.
But what if we actually, rather than all that extrinsic, motivation stuff, like do this because it's in the Bible and, you're ordained to word, sacrament, order, service, all those things. What if we still gave space for people to explore their intrinsic motivations, the things that they love and the people that they're more naturally inclined to be with, and then formed relationships around those things, and then these little expressions of church. And we just said over all of that, that's good too. That's ministry too. That's the pastor's work as well. Not just when you come in on Sunday and put on the robe or whatever, but all of that actually. And then it challenges this idea that there's the sacred space and the secular space, but actually the entire cosmos is sacred, and there's no place we could gather and no thing we could do that would not be imbued with the sacred divine life of God, including Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop gaming and all those things. So
yeah, Michael, I think you're 100% right about that. I try to nosedive off of every pedestal anybody tries to put me on. I am not I am not a I don't know. I do not like the idea that people think that pastors just can't be people and can't have interests and can't have things that they really enjoy. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. That whole sacred secular divide is just a load.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wonder with Dungeons and Dragons. First, maybe because not all of our listeners might be super familiar with the game, so maybe you could give like an overview of what that game kind of looks like. And then I wonder if you think that tabletop role-playing games, or maybe just games in general, do you feel like they might be like uniquely conducive to having spiritual conversations? And then I also wonder, another part to this is the fantasy element that's within the Dungeons and Dragons world, because there are gods and like demons, and there is like the hero's journey and a lot of these things that I think I can see being conducive to religious spiritual conversations. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So let's see. I'll get on a little bit of why we chose Dungeons and Dragons as being the primary game for Game Church. First of all, it's just popular right now. Like a lot of people are getting into it, and so we figured that we had a good chance of getting more people with a game that people really enjoy playing. But I do think there is something about tabletop gaming in general that is conducive to relationships in general and spiritual relationships. But I think there is something, and it's like coming to the table, like literally coming to the table, physically present with each other, is something that you cannot replace online. Now, people do play Dungeons and Dragons online. I mean, any tabletop game you have, there's usually an online version, either official or someone just made it themselves, but it's never the same. And I think that's kind of similar in church. Like, we have online ways of doing church, and those are good and should be pursued. But there's something that happens when you're at the table together as well. And so almost, I think it mirrors that in spiritual relationships as well. I think there is a real, whether you want to call it like a dinner table atmosphere at the gaming table, where we're just together and enjoying each other's company, that lends itself to then being a springboard into spiritual relationships as well. And so I think that physically present element of it is a major deal, and I think that tabletop gaming is actually one of the few areas in our culture right now where you have to be physically present in order for it to 100% work. Now, I also think Dungeons and Dragons in particular is a good game for this, because it is if you've never played, it is a cooperative game. Like, you don't win Dungeons and Dragons necessarily. What you're doing is telling a story. And so the other people that you're playing with are called your party, and your party is working together to go through a story that the game master has put you in. And so and even the game master isn't against the party. The game master wants the party to succeed and wants the party to have a good time, and also to be challenged. And so you're all working together to collaboratively tell a story that one of you could not tell by yourselves. And I think that collaboration part of the game also really lends itself to a spiritual adjacent experience. I mean, I think even people, who aren't Christians that play D&D, they get really into it. And I think that it's because there are some of those community aspects, some of those social aspects that that you also find in churches. And so, if we actually just come in here and say, God is present here, God is in the midst of this, we can transform this thing that has already kind of given people some of those community vibes that they get from church, and actually just, encourage them in their relationship with God as well.
Matt, I love what you shared there, and I'm just kind of reflecting on my own experience in this. And then I want to hear, Piper, what your experience with gaming and nerd stuff and tabletop is. But in Dungeons and Dragons, so 9th grade dropout here. Don't encourage anybody to do that. But D&D was very formative. It was like basically my educational process. And the relationships I built with this group of guys, we were doing illegal stuff. It was not healthy. It was not a good time in my life. But those relationships that we developed around playing Dungeons and Dragons together, like every day sometimes, and definitely every week, we became a band. Like those guys became like my main support system in my life as an abandoned orphan child growing up in the streets. And we had a depth of relationship that I've rarely shared that. What I would call that biblically is like koinonia, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Communal life in Jesus. And then inviting people into the story, like that's what we do as preachers, right? We're inviting people into the story of Jesus and to find our place in that story and to go through the challenges and adventures together of what that looks like. But I could totally see your skills as, facilitating, DMing, leading people through that story, definitely translating over as a pastor, inviting people and walking alongside them on that story. Yeah. I'd love to hear some insights from you and from Piper, like what your experience of all this is.
So the other great thing is like we've got a Discord channel now too. If you're not familiar with Discord, it's kind of a social networking that's around gaming. But when we're not meeting, we're chatting in the Discord about stuff that's going on in our lives, stuff that we're thinking about with our characters. It has become it has transcended just the every other week game night, and we really are a support system for each other too, and that has been nice. But Piper, I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you.
No, I think that's great. I mean, for me, it's I got into Dungeons and Dragons just because a friend was into it, and that was at a coffee shop we worked together, and that was all he talked about was Dungeons and Dragons, and I was like, well, I love fantasy, and mostly I'm more of a sci-fi person, but so we got really into that, and we actually with the coffee shop we hosted a couple Dungeons and Dragons nights, and it was just open to the public for whoever to come. And it was great to see people that, just maybe some people had gotten into watching people play on YouTube, and they really loved watching the dynamics and had basically knew all the rules, but had never actually gotten a chance to play with people. And now, and so making those connections and creating kind of friendships and, it's a way, like you were saying, Matt, that people that might be that are more introverted, it gives them a motivation to go out and to hang out with and meet new people, but it's still in a package of something that they're comfortable with, so somebody who might not want to have the so where are you from kind of conversation could talk for hours and hours and hours about the lore behind this one certain storyline in this one game setting or whatever. Yep. And so it creates a space where people can dive in. And then I think when you get deeper and deeper into D&D, into anything, you get deeper into the lore and the background and why and how the game was kind of created. And then you can start to create your own, they call them home brews, where you can take Dungeons and Dragons and change the rules around and to make it fit like what you think the game should be. And then you can create a whole new world. And that's where I think it could be really fun to explore spirituality too, in that kind of way, and creating these settings where you can have these, maybe put your party into like a moral dilemma where they have to wrestle with something that is kind of reflects everyday life. And that's what I love about fantasy and sci-fi, is that it is way out there and it's beyond our world in different ways. But most of the time, sci-fi, I mean, it's still coming from our world. So it's still coming from our experiences and from our fears or from our hopes. And so there's so much that we can learn from those kinds of stories, and exploring those kinds of stories that help, that you can even get a little bit deeper than if you were just working within the quote unquote real world. So I love all of that kind of stuff. I think about it a lot. I'm in a sci-fi kind of world right now and soaking all that stuff in.
Yeah. And I think it just gives us more metaphors to talk about our faith and to talk about life in general. When you're just straightforward talking about things, sometimes people just don't want to engage deep thought or deep things head on. You have to use metaphor. And I think it just gives us more metaphors to work with. And especially when our group has a shared language and a shared experience together, and a shared, almost, just this shared fantasy setting with which to talk. It just gives us new and different ways to engage the real stuff without having to just hit it head on all the time.
That's so good.
Yeah.
I wonder if Jesus was like the greatest dungeon master who ever lived, because his parables, his parables were in a sense inviting people into a story, and they were metaphors, right? But they were actually bringing out some of the deepest joys and pain points of the human experience, and people's ability to locate themselves in that was part of his being a rabbi and his teaching model, right? Discipling people in that, using the imagination, which I think imagination's our superpower, and it's one of the most beautiful gifts I think that God gives us. But if you think about like Joseph Campbell's work, and some of my favorite theologians, C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, and people who've used fantasy actually to communicate in metaphor, like Star Wars is my thing. Star Wars. Here. And I'm definitely a Sith Lord, and so I have a lot of tension with other clergy because they typically are Jedi.
Yeah.
So I don't really appreciate Jedi scum very much. But
I'm a scum and villainy guy. I want to be like the smuggler.
Yeah,
that's where I'm at.
You're like a Han Solo.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I do think that metaphor and things helps a whole lot. Like I have a fresh expression called Brew Theology, and we meet and talk about religion and philosophy and breweries. And this last time we met, we talked about what I was really wanting to talk about was a specific philosopher, but his name is Jean Baudrillard. But because of his work was influential in the creation of the Matrix, and so was where we kind of seeded the conversation, and that was one of our best ones yet, because the metaphor, I think it helps people make connections really quickly, and then it helps to get to that when you can kind of dive into those deeper layers. So I'm a fan of that metaphor.
One of the things that our party is really doing, just talking about like metaphor in the game. So I haven't really gotten much into connecting the game itself with spiritual themes. I don't know. I don't want to be like heavy-handed about it. I don't want to run a Christian D&D game. I just want to have like the church time and then also a fun D&D game, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Like I don't want it to be, overtly Christian in the actual game itself. But one of the fun things we're doing is like, in D&D, traditionally there have been just like evil races, like if you see a goblin, you can pretty much kill that goblin, and he probably deserved it. But we are really like grappling as a party, and I'm trying to help them grapple as a DM with like, well, why are all these goblins like, they're not all evil. Maybe they're good. Maybe they're just misunderstood, and so we are grappling with the morality of like, these creatures aren't inherently evil because they have worth and they have value and they have a family, and so we're trying to grapple with like violence and how in this game, which is kind of based around combat. I mean, you can't get around it, but like, who are we fighting and why are we fighting them? And we're trying to be a little more careful about how we do that. And so I think that's been just an interesting way to like touch on faith and touch on like these deep themes within the game.
So you might have a conversation with a goblin and try to figure them out before you just start to cast spells at them or
absolutely.
Nice.
Yeah.
Let me hear your instinct on that. Like your instinct to not Christianize the game, but to have that be its own distinct thing, and then kind of keep the game pure as it is. What do you feel? What's your why behind that?
I mean, I don't know if you've ever watched King of the Hill, but there's the episode where Bobby really gets into this Christian rock group, and Hank goes up to the guy and says, "You're not making rock and roll better. No, wait, you're not making Christianity better. You're just making rock and roll worse." And so I'm trying to just avoid that. I just don't want to. I want to come at those things sideways. I want to come to the Christian themes sideways, but I just, I grew up in a very like evangelical culture where there was a Christian version of everything, and the Christian version was always worse. And so I don't know. Maybe this is just my own thing of I just don't want to. I just want to play the best D&D game I can, be the best DM I can, and then also encourage spiritual relationships at the table. But I don't know. And that's just my instinct. I'm just guided by Hank Hill in that matter.
Well, I think there's some wisdom in Hank Hill there.
Yeah, definitely.
I know Piper wants to move us into some more practical stuff for our listeners, but I think that gets us into it, right? Because I appreciate you giving our listeners space for that to be okay. And a fresh expression doesn't have to be the Christianization of whatever the practice that you're rallying around.
Right.
I do a lot of opt-in. Hey, we're going to gather, before we have Tattoo Parlor Church to have a spiritual convo. Anybody wants to be involved in that? Or, hey, next week we're going to stay late and do this thing called the Lord's Supper. Let me unpack what that is. So people who want to, they can be part of that. But the whole thing's we're not trying to Christianize whatever the thing is and make it some B-level version of whatever.
Yep.
So the people who are ready for that, they can do that. But then we're just in the purity of doing that thing together. And there's something beautiful about that.
Yeah, I think that is right. And, that was one of the tensions we had to start out with. My friend, Father David, and I, we started this together, and we said, we do not want this to be a bait and switch. We don't want it to be, hey, come play D&D with us. Oops, you're at a Bible study. Like, that is not an experience I ever want anybody to have. And so like, there's a Savannah D&D Facebook group, and sometimes people will hop on there and say, hey, I'm looking for a game. And then I'll hop back and say, you're welcome. We want you at our table. But, heads up, this is what we're doing, and this is why we exist. And we would love to have you. And if that's not your thing, that's okay too. And honestly, if they want to just come 15 minutes late and skip the whole spiritual part, we would love to have them as well. Like I'm not going to kick them out for that. That, the Bible study is not the price of the game. So This is something that but that's a value we very much want to have, because I never want people to feel, taken off guard by the fact that there is a spiritual aspect to this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it'd be an invitation, palms up kind of thing. Join if you
Absolutely.
want,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you think that role playing also is just healthy for our humanity. Like, it has the capacity to put us in different perspectives and to like try to embody that person and see life through the eyes of that character. Does that not maybe become a skill that builds empathy and compassion and like?
I absolutely think so. I think it's such a shame that D&D got like caught up in all that satanic panic in the 90s, because it
Yeah.
truly is a great method of building that empathy, building our imaginations, helping us to live into metaphors. Like, there's so many good skills that it can promote in us. And even just like conflict resolution stuff, because I'm at a table with someone else that's playing. And if I'm hogging all of the cool stuff, then I'm not being a good party member. And so even just like interpersonal dynamics that you practice at the table are really great.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the logistics of how your group got started. How do you get the word out, and how did you get that relationship with the tabletop store that you do that at? So that if anybody's interested in doing what you're doing or something similar, what would be kind of your advice?
Sure. So, I had a relationship with the owner of the store. Like I said, I've been playing at that store for years now. And so, we know each other. We're Facebook friends. And so I just said, Jeremy, I'm thinking about doing this. Is this something that would be okay with you? And he said, yeah, man. And I kind of expected him to like ask more questions. So I was like, are you sure? Like, we're not going to be, we're not going to like proselytize. We're not going to stand up and preach it. And he's like, no, man, it's good. I trust you. So that was really good. I really do recommend. And of course, if you want to start now, you don't have years to go and just develop a relationship with someone. But I do recommend having a good relationship. It helps to spend money at that store. That really, every time we go, I just go and buy a drink. I don't have to spend hundreds of dollars all the time, but I want to make sure that they are profiting at least a little bit from the fact that we're there. And if I ever am buying a book or a figure or anything, I make sure I buy it from them, because I want to make sure that that we're just good neighbors and good users of that space. Like I said, I kind of had a core group. I had Father David, who also I knew loved D&D. I had my buddy that I played X-Wing with. His son, he has got an 18-year-old son. His son was a part of it. So we made sure we had enough people involved that we could have a game run, even if no one else showed up. Even if it's just us, we're not like, oh, I guess we'll just go home. And then after that, we just started inviting people. We really made use of the Discord channel of the store. We made use of the Facebook group of Savannah D&D. We just invited our friends, and it kind of has grown organically from there. We have got a good problem I never thought we would have. Our party's almost too big. I think we've got 8 people in our party, and it's just really a little bit like unmanageable. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so like if one more person comes, we're going to have to either start a second night or have another DM and run 2 campaigns at once or something. Like, we're going to have to figure out what to do. Mm-hmm. It's a great problem to have, though. I'm so excited about it.
Definitely.
Yeah. I don't know if this was intentional in any way or what, but I just have to point this out, the fresh expression nerd in me, that you basically followed the journey, step by step. Locate a person of peace, start with a team. That the person of peace, Luke 10, opens that space to you, that relationship. Listen, love and serve, build relationships, explore spiritual depth, discipleship, whatever.
That was very much intentional too. We have great cultivators in South Georgia in our conference that very much walked us through those steps too. So that was not an accident. I probably should have used that language better on a Fresh Expressions podcast.
Oh, it's awesome, because now you're at repeat. Basically, you're at multiply. So you either have to figure out who we're going to break off, start another group, or are we going to, figure out how to make this bigger or whatever. But yeah,
it is wonderful, and it's just. A lot of times it's the best part of my week. I really enjoy these people. I enjoy the people I've met through this group, and it's been a really good time.
So don't let me interject something foreign to your way you're going about this, but have you seen any kind of crossover with the people that you're in the Fresh Expression with getting involved in the life of the Inherited Church in any way?
No, I haven't. And I'm not mad about that. I think the people that we've got coming are people that would not have gotten involved in any way. So I don't think. Now, I have, like, a couple of times people have gone to the hospital for something or have had a medical emergency, and they've called me, and I have done pastoral care for them. So I do feel like my role as I think they see me as their pastor. And so that has been kind of a flip where they have sort of gotten involved in the life of the local church in that way. But no, I haven't really seen that from those folks, and I don't really expect to. I think for them, this kind of is their church.
Love that.
Yeah.
Does your go-to like role, fighter, priest, paladin, wizard, or do you have a go-to that's your favorite character to kind of play, and does it align any with your vocation as a
Yeah. Well, so I didn't start out being the dungeon master. I started out being a player, and my friend Robert was the dungeon master. And I took over somewhat recently as the DM after our first campaign finished. So I was playing a cleric, a gnome cleric. So I guess that does track. Like, if you're not involved in D&D, a cleric is basically a priest.
Yeah.
But I was a cleric of the goddess of good fortune. And so he was very much a gambler kind of cleric. He wasn't very pious as you and I would think of him. And right now I've got it coming back because my original character is trying to rob his old temple. Because in our game, the temple that he worked at is really a casino. You worship the goddess of good luck by going and gambling in her casino. So we're doing a casino heist on the temple right now.
Nice.
And that's the party's goal right this second. So it's a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Great. I always love, like, it's funny because when people create their characters, it's either like basically almost exactly like them on accident, or it's like a version of them that they want to be, or sometimes it's like, I'm going to be the complete opposite of myself. So, maybe I'm going to be like this dark, mysterious guy who does nefarious things, or I'm going to be this really strong, you can always kind of tell. It reflects a little bit of somebody's like self-image and also kind of who they wish they were a little bit sometimes.
I like to play a druid too. I just like to be feral, just that that connected with nature, kind of out of control, animal from the Muppets vibes.
Yeah,
the druid.
Michael, what kind of characters would you play?
Yeah, so like you, Matt, I started characters, then became the dungeon master, and did that most of my time in the D&D world. But I definitely lean towards fighters, berserkers, people that just like to come in and kill, steal, and destroy.
That's great.
The wild child.
Yeah.
See, that tracks, right?
Yeah.
I did play a dwarf one time, a dwarven battle rager named Rage Turtle. He was pretty badass.
That's funny.
My cleric was a gnome, and I tried to make his personality based on Danny DeVito. So I had like an accent for him and everything. It was
great.
Nice.
When you bring out the accent, that's when it's the real deal. Makes it really
fun. Oh yeah. Accents are how you play.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay. One of the questions that we had was wondering if you could give some advice for people that might have a hobby or a passion or something, like for you is, fantasy, sci-fi, something like that, and how they could kind of begin that process of starting to think about building spiritual community around it. Do you have any advice for that?
Yeah, well, this is kind of anti-advice for that. Well, one of my big things, though, and I just got to shout it out, is that you don't have to turn every hobby that you have into a side hustle. You don't have to turn every hobby you
Yes.
have into a fresh expression. It's okay for your hobby just to be your hobby and something that you enjoy, and you don't have to like be productive because of it. Okay, there's my public service announcement.
And
But if it's something that you feel like has the potential to be something that you want to form a spiritual community around it, just be cool. Like, it's just be cool. Don't allow those relationships to form naturally, and allow your passion for the thing itself to be the thing that initially connects you. I think people can tell when you're too sweaty, when you're too thirsty for like for them to join your group or to be a part of your thing. Yeah, it's just a turnoff. It's a turnoff for me when I can tell someone's like real thirsty for it. So I don't know if that's actionable advice or not, but be cool and just enjoy it for what it is. Enjoy it for itself, and then if other people are enjoying it too, if they're connecting spiritually, then it'll take off. And if not, then you still enjoyed it. Like, you still had a good time for what you did.
Yeah, I like that.
That's good advice. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a church here in my district that they just built some pickleball courts. And part of, I think, the reason they did that is because, or why it kind of all is working well, is because the pastor herself was a tennis player, and she and then now she plays, pickleball, and she does it just because she loves it. And there is, spiritual community is growing out of that. But the main idea is just like, let's, we know people that like to play this game. Let's make a space where people can play. And so it's open to the public. Anybody can come down to the grounds of the church and play pickleball, and they go out in the evenings and stuff when it gets a little cooler. And yeah, they're cool about it.
Yeah. And, people are disconnected and they're lonely right now. And, offering people a space with an open hand that says, I'm not thirsty for you to be here, but like, I would love it to connect with you. And it's amazing how much people will take you up on that. But if they think that they're just a number, you just want them to come and fill a seat or so that you look good or you look impressive, then they're not going to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Just be cool. Don't suck as a human being, and just enjoy the thing that you're doing, and relationships will kind of organically build out of that. I have this thing I call like my fresh expression spidey senses.
Yeah.
Or it's almost like the dark side of the force constantly compelling me to see all these possibilities everywhere. I'm like,
yeah,
it could be, that. But then there's places I have to turn that off.
Yeah.
Like I like to go to the gym most days, and I've had, my wife's asked me and other people, you spend a lot of time there, you like know people and stuff. Why don't you, start some kind of faith group in there? Like, that's my space where I just need to stink and sweat and don't talk to me. I'm just not a nice person in that space. I'm just not trying to start a new faith community in that space, right?
Yeah.
But then there's a lot of places where I see those possibilities, and it's good. So I think there has to be a balance where we don't make everything we're trying to form a church, but there are a lot of things that would amplify and make those things better if we were more intentional around
for sure.
Such, yeah.
And you know what? If I get to pour over the monster manual while I'm planning a casino heist during the work week, then oh well. That's just I'm working. Sorry.
Part of the job.
That's right.
And you'll work it in the Sunday sermon.
Yeah, maybe.
Oh yeah. Yeah, your wife hasn't done a moratorium on Dungeons and Dragons in your sermons yet, so
she hasn't. No, so I can do that. I can work on that.
Great.
She was 100% right to do that, by the way. That was not a buzzkill. She
well deserved.
She is absolutely right. You cannot talk about Star Trek and Lord of the Rings as much as I was and expect regular people to care.
Yeah. Save it for Game Church.
That's right. Now those folks will care.
Yeah. That's
Before I ask this next question, Matt, because we want to hear, like, we love to ask this question just about the future of the church and what that looks like in your imagination. But I love what you said about just giving introverts space to thrive in their own, setting and practice. I have a lot of people who are like, I'm not an evangelist. I don't want to be involved in this, or, I'm not the person who's going to go out and like invite people to church or tell people about Jesus. And people have different, wirings and even spiritual gifts that there's a matrix around that. But I've seen some of my buddies that would definitely, I'm like right in the middle, extrovert, introvert, but who are definitely more in that introverted space, really come alive in stuff like this and feel comfortable in inviting and practicing their faith and sharing faith even. Whereas in some settings, this would feel totally awkward and hostile. But something like this where the relationships are the centerpiece of what we're trying to do, not necessarily convert people, but like the relationships are the mission, just loving each other well and knowing each other. So it's really cool to see how all different kind of personalities can really thrive in this. But if you have a thought about that, I'd love to hear it. And then tell us, what do you see as the future of the church? What does that look like?
Oh man, I don't know about the future of the church. I mean, I worry about it, but my hope for the future of the church is that we can just be cool. I don't know. I hate to just keep coming back to that, but like my hope for the future of the church is that we become focused on relationships, and we become focused on welcoming people where they are. And I feel like for so long, we've been almost like goal based with other people. It's like, man, I want to move this person from point A to point B. And then once he's there, we point B to point C. And it's like, we've got this discipleship pipeline that we're trying to move people along. And man, I don't want people to treat me that way. I don't want people to say, man, I love Matt, but he would be so much better if he would just X, Y, or Z. I want them to just like being around me. And so my hope for the future of the church is that we won't have this goal-based system for our relationships, especially for the relationships with people on the margins of church, but that we would love people where they are for who they are, and then let God be the one that moves them along where God wants to move them. And so that's, what we're trying to do at Game Church. And I think that's what God has called me to do as a pastor in general.
Yeah, that's good. Just like there's no winners in Dungeons and Dragons, there's no ultimate goal or something.
Yeah, it's a collaboration.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Well, any final thoughts, feelings? Anything else you would say to an audience of people who are interested in doing church in new and innovative ways and maybe redefining what church looks like for them?
Yeah, just find where your interests and lonely people intersect. And I think that is a place where you are ripe for a new expression of church.
That's good.
That's good. Write that down, Michael. That's a good one.
That is a good one. The intersection of where your passion and interest and lonely people meet. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, Matt, is there anywhere that people can learn more about what you do with at your church? And then also, is Game Church anywhere online? Anything like that?
It is not. So I made a decision not to care about the internet very much. I use the internet to read things, but I very rarely post anything. So we have a Discord for Game Church. I'm not even sure how to find it. Type in Game Church on Discord and you might find us. I don't know. Try it out. I think we have a Facebook page too, but we don't use it very much. So I'm very sorry. My internet presence is very limited. I thought I wanted to try to be an influencer a few years ago, and then I was like, nope, that sucks. I will just be anonymous, and that was better.
Yeah, I feel you. I did the
I'm
same
sorry.
thing.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No, don't be sorry. It's awesome.
So
Yeah.
how could people, if they wanted to like speak
Yeah.
to you directly?
So
or
yeah,
church website?
I am at Matt Stout on most social medias. I scooped up my actual name as my username on most things. So look me up, Matt Stout. My church's website is gardencityumc.com. And my email is revmattstout@gmail.com. So just go ahead and email me. That's fine. I'll put that out there.
Cool. Well, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. I really have enjoyed this.
Yeah,
Great
I'm
conversation.
excited. We're going to see some game churches happening everywhere.
I would love that. Yeah, let me know. And if there's anything I can do to support a game church anywhere, here's a tip: buy a 3D printer. See if you can expense a 3D printer, because I've been printing minis for our games, and my players love it. So
That's great.
There's a tip.
Nice.
Love it. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Matt, for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you, Piper. Thank you, Michael. This is wonderful.
Yeah.
Yes,
Thank you so
great
much.
conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to those listening, thanks for joining in on this episode of New People, New Ways. If you enjoyed our conversation with Matt, share it with a friend, rate, review, subscribe. And to connect with us and learn more about Fresh Expressions, you can check out freshexpressionsfl.org and find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. See you next time on New People, New Ways.